Hello and welcome everyone to Callantir's Rush or Royal University of Sheer Havoc. This evening we're hosting Baroness Birna Isleifsdottir, who's going to talk to us about Norse cosmology with Legos and a cow. Take it
Legos
away.
and a cow. All right. This is the first time I've ever done this with a Zoom. Most of the time, I'm just like wandering. So I'm going to try to do this. Everything that I'm going to tell you today is available in that book right there, Norse Divination, available on Amazon. And the new one coming out, Norse Cosmology, will be out December 8th. And Norse cosmology is the deepest dive that's been done so far in medieval Icelandic literature. So that's coming out December 8th. Both of them available from Llewellyn, and both of them available on Amazon. So let's dig in and let's go for it. I usually say that in the beginning, hang on, let me move this all there. Okay. I usually say that in the beginning, there's Gnungagap, but that's not really true, because before the beginning of all the Norse, there is Muspelheim on this side, the realm of fire and lava and smoke, and the Eldjotun, the fire giants, who Surta is their king. And on this side is Niflheim, which is the land of ice and snow. So to say in the beginning kind of gives you an idea that none of that exists. But you've got Muspelheim, Niflheim. In the middle, Gnungagap, forms with ice and heat a great bit of fog and mist and ice. And from that comes Ymir. No, he's not a Lego. It's okay. And Ymir is the first ice giant. And Ymir is floating in this great cosmic void, pumping out other giants from under his armpits and between his legs. I know you have to really figure what kind of things they were drinking when they figured this out. So, as Ymir is doing all of these giants, another block of ice forms. Block of ice. And then Adumla, the cosmic cow, comes floating in thinking, oh, the lack of gravity really does my udders some strange things. And she starts licking the ice. As she licks the ice, she feeds Ymir, who is still generating lots of giants. And as Adumla licks the ice, first a head appears, and then arms, and then legs, and eventually the first Asiya. And this is Buri. So Buri mates with one of the female ice giants and has Bor. This is Bor. Okay, there's Bor. And Bor mates with Besla, who is also an ice giant and has 3 children: Odin, Vili, and V. Now, doing all of this, Ymir is still pumping out ice giants. And the cosmic void is starting to get less voided and more filled with ice giants. So Odin and his 2 brothers figure, we need to do something, so they kill Ymir. And when they kill him, all the blood from Ymir washes all the giants off the edge, as well as Adumla. And the only giant that survives is Besmer. And somehow he finds a boat in the middle of this cosmic void and floats off to Jotunheim with his wife. So that's how we get ice giants in Jotunheim. Okay. But Odin doesn't stop there. He takes 4 maggots from the rotting corpse of Ymir and creates Suda, Norda, Esta, and Usta and Vesta, north, south, east, and west, creates 4 dwarfs, takes off the head of Ymir, throws it up in the sky, and makes the heavens. Takes flames from Muspelheim, makes the stars, and then slowly takes apart Ymir and makes everything else. All right. So now we've got all of this cosmic stuff being built. And it looks like that behind me. And I don't know if you can see that, so I'm going to move the thing a little. And that is Yggdrasil and the 9 realms. Okay. I will send a photo of that at the end of this lecture so that you'll be able to get a better shot of it. As they start building this realm, Odin, Honor, and Loki get together and create the first man and the first woman, Asker and Embla, Ash and Elm. And they put them in Midgard. Now, you've got 9 realms, but only 2 of them end in Gard, and 7 of them end in Heim. And a lot of people they have a real problem with that because they should all end in one ending. But here's the secret. Midgard and Asgard are the most perfect of worlds. It goes back to the Icelandic words Uningad and Utgad, the inner realm and the outer realm. The outer realm are called Heims. Even though Vanaheim is like really, really super nice, it's perfect, it's glowing, it's not quite as nice as Asgard. The Heims, like Alfheim, Svartalheim, Niflheim, that's where people actually go to get their fame and their glory. It's sort of like, if you know Italian landscape architecture, it's a bosco, they call it. It's that wildness on the outside of the fences. So that's why you've got 7 Heims and 2 Gards. Okay? Midgard is protected from all the other Heims, and the only way you can get there is through Bifrost. And I contend, as some of the others, I contend that when the Icelanders and the Scandinavians and the Danish and the Swedes and the Norse and the Norwegians were looking up at the heavens, the northern lights, the aurora borealis, became their idea of Bifrost. Because how else can you have this glowing light going across the heavens from the earth to the sky? And so with practical magic, or whatever you want to call it, they called it Bifrost, the magical bridge. And that's the only way that you can get to Midgard from Asgard, okay? And it protects everybody. This is where it starts getting a little funky. And this is where I want to start talking about different ideas that you may or may not agree with. We have, where is she? There it is. We talked about Loki, okay? Here's Loki, little green Loki. And we have another frost giant by the name of Angrboda. The 2 of them got together. And since they're not human, they didn't necessarily have human children. They had 3 offspring. They had the Fenris wolf, they had Jormungandr, and they had the goddess Hel. Now I want to talk about each of these because each of these has a disconnect somewhere in the sagas. First of all, Fenris. Fenris is a puppy. He's self-aware. He can talk. But the Fates, the Norns, have said that he and his brother Jormungandr will usher in Ragnarok, the end of everything. So Odin, knowing that, does not kill him. Now, common sense would say, if you know that these 2 creatures are going to end everything, you'd off them, right? No, Odin says, we're going to take them up to Asgard, we're going to tame him. And as he gets bigger and bigger and bigger, they realize they can't. So they start playing a game with him to try to tie him down. They do ropes, they do chains, and he breaks them eventually. So finally, they get this rope made by the dwarves that cannot be broken. It's called Gleipnir. And when Fenris sees this, he knows something's funky. So he says, I will let you tie me with it, but only if one of you puts your arm in my mouth. So in case you're lying to me, I'll take the arm off. So Tyr puts his arm in. Fenris gets caught. Tyr loses the arm. Oh, well, Fenris is tied to a rock for eternity. This is the problem I have with this story. We all use Tyr as the ultimate honest person. We swear loyalty. We swear oaths by Tyr. And that son of a bitch lied outright to Fenris. So I think there was a disconnect there. That's that first disconnect. Second of Loki's children, Jormungandr. Jormungandr is a great serpent. Eventually it encircles the earth, bites its own tail, and story says that when he lets go his tail, he will usher in Ragnarok. However, when Thor is out fishing with Heimir, who is Tyr's father, he catches Jormungandr. And in order to catch him with a fish and a rod, you've got to open your mouth. So if that's the case, then we should have already ushered in Ragnarok. Second disconnect. Third disconnect is this little darling right here. The goddess Hel. Third child of Loki. Everybody writes about Hel as being half corpulent, maggot-filled, and the other half incredibly beautiful. I take exception to that because I don't think it's exactly that way. You don't have to agree with me. You know, this is why you're here. I believe that Hel, excuse me, I believe that Hel is always beautiful unless you have a evil heart, at which point you see the evil of Hel. And Hel will be there long after Ragnarok, dealing with the dead. She is also one of the few individuals who keeps her word of all the gods and goddesses. And I'm going to give you this example now. Balder, Odin's most beautiful and loving son. Who's Balder? Balder, beautiful Balder. Frigg goes to everything in the 9 realms, living and dead, and gets them to swear not to harm her son. And she ignores the mistletoe. So everybody's throwing things at Balder. They're trying to hurt Balder. It's a big game. Until Loki makes a dart out of mistletoe and hands it to his blind friend, Balder's brother, Hothor. Now, Hothor's blind. He has no idea what he's throwing. He throws the dart. Balder dies. Odin is so bereft over this that he immediately knocks up some other Jotun, has another child just so he can kill his blind son who didn't know what he was doing. But the bottom line is, Odin then sends Honor on Sleipnir, the 8-legged horse, down to Helheim to ask Hel to give back Balder. And Hel says yes. Now, if Hel was that evil and that nasty, she would just said no. But she said, yes, I will do that if everything, living and dead, agrees for me to release him. Frigg goes all over the 9 realms. The witch Thok, which is actually Loki in disguise, says no. And Hel keeps Balder. Again, disconnect. You've got a goddess who's supposed to be ugly and evil, actually holding honor and discipline and fairness above anything else, when the Allfather kills his only other son for no reason except he threw something not knowing what he was throwing. Who's the evil one in that and who isn't? Okay, so let's talk about the different realms. You've got Vanaheim. Vanaheim is the world of the Vanir. They're almost Assyrian, Asgardian or Assyrians, but they're not quite. They're sort of like your cousin who has a nice yard but doesn't mow it as much, and they are Vanaheim. Freya, Freyr, and Njord are all Vanir. At one point, Freya goes to Asgard. She is the goddess of Sitha, magic. She's teaching Sitha to all the Asgardians, and Odin takes offense at it. He gets pissy because they're trying to learn magic rather than being the epitome of whatever they're being the epitome of. And he tries to kill her. Fails. Tries a second time. Fails. Tries a third time, and finally they have a war. The Vaners and the Azia fight. No one wins. So they sue for peace. This is the ultimate humor that I laugh about in the sagas. They send people back and forth. The Asgardians send Mimir and Honor. The Vanir send Freya, Freyr, and Njord. So after Freya caused a war, she goes back and almost becomes an Asgardian. Everybody thinks that she's from Asgard. So where is the common sense of that? All right, that's another disconnect. All of these stories come from a number of sources. And now we're going to get into a little literature. All right, this is the Prose Edda. It was not written by Snorri Sturluson. It was written long before Snorri Sturluson. A lot of it is in the Flateyr book. Some of it's in the Heimskringla. However, he put it together in 5 chapters. I want to read you how it starts. Now, you got to remember that Snorri was Christian. He was a bishop. He eventually was assassinated. But when he wrote all this, he wrote it under that cloud. So when you think of Ginnungagap and Muspelheim and everything, this is how the Prose Edda begins. In the beginning, Almighty God created heaven and earth and all that pertains to them. Lastly, he created 2 people, Adam and Eve. Does that sound Norse? No, it's Christian. It's the prologue, in the beginning. It isn't until the Gylfaginning that they actually start telling the stories, and they're not telling them as real stories. They're telling them as tales because Snorri wants you to know them, but he can't admit that they're actual happenings because by then, in the 1200s, Iceland had been Christian for 200 years, and some of the other Scandinavian countries had been Christian for 400 years. You don't tell stories about the Norse gods in a Christian world, especially in that Christian world. The other fun thing is 32 generations later, Thor shows up, and one of his children is Odin. So the way Snorri wrote the beginning is nothing like the sagas. So let's go to the Eddas. This is the Poetic Edda. This was written by Snorri. I like the Larrington version. There are a number of them out there. I think Caroline does a better job with her footnotes. You know, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. My wife and I have actually seen the actual Eddas in vellum. and they're just there. Another source is Saxo Grammaticus. Saxo Grammaticus was a German. He wrote 16 chapters. The first 9, books 1 to 9, are the history of the Danes, which is basically the history of all the kings and queens. And this is where we get a lot of our history of the Scandinavians. And this is pre-Icelandic expansion and migration. Finally, we get to, and pardon me for a moment, we get to the only example of a Viking burning and a Viking funeral. See, I told you, Legos. Okay. But they didn't do it on water. They did it on land. And the example comes from Ibn Fadlan, who Michael Crichton ended up using as an example when he wrote The 13th Warrior, which was a screenplay of Eaters of the Dead, which isn't a bad movie. It's not a great movie, but it's not a bad movie. But in this, Fadlan talks about the slave girl in paradise and how she is slaughtered and sacrificed to be with her master. Most of you, I'm going to take for granted, have either seen, heard, or watched Lo there, do I see my mother? Lo there, do I see my father? Lo there, do I see my ancestors back to the beginning, yada, yada. It comes off of Crichton. It's on T-shirts. We were in Hawaii last year, and I saw some young goth kid wearing it, and it made me laugh because it's a slave's lament, and this is the original. I asked the interpreter what she had been doing. He replied, the first time they lifted her up, she said, there, I see my father and my mother. The second time she said, there, I see all my dead relatives. And the third time she said, there, I see my master sitting in paradise, and paradise is green and beautiful. There are men with him. Take me to him. That's the original that we all now think is, lo there, do I see my mother and father. So if you want to really understand a lot of what comes through the Norse, what comes through, and I'm not going to use the word Viking, what comes through the Norse or Northern literature, you need to read it in the original. And I'm not saying please go and learn Icelandic. Oh my God, Yatala Islenska. I don't speak Icelandic well, and I've been studying it all my life. But get a certified or a good copy and read all the stories. Now we talk about the different races. Okay? Dwarfs. They live in the they live in the caves. They live in all the different caverns. They're very good with gold and silver and metal. And there are stories of how they built Glipnir, the rope, Gungnir, Odin's spear, Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, and a number of other different things that the gods used. Dwarves. Light elves. The only difference between light elves and dark elves is Alfheim gets more sun than Svartalfheim. That's it. There is nothing in the literature that says they are dark or swarthy or brown or black or whatever. They are just dark versus light. And it has to do with where they live and how they live. All right. Humans. Yay, humans. They live in Midgard. They're stuck here. some of the gods, well, they're not really gods. Some of the Aesir and some of the others come to Midgard. They come to enjoy the scenery, to have lunch, I don't know, go to the beach. But humans cannot go anywhere else. It is our prison. And thinking about it, considering what's out there, you might think that's not a bad idea. Finally, and we talked about this earlier, giants. You can call them trolls, you can call them Geigers, you can call them Jotuns. Bottom line is, they're called giants. In the literature, giants are so large at some points that Thor sleeps in a glove of a giant and thinks it's a cave. However, nowhere in the literature does it say that giants are ugly or hideous or any of that. Freyr falls in love with Gerda and offers his manservant his sword, Skirmir, to go get her so that he may woo her and wed her. Let's face it, Freyr is not going to fall in love with some hideous, large giantess. So therefore, you have to start thinking, do they look like humans? Are they not quite humans? Freyr sleeps with 4 different dwarfs in order to get her necklace Bracengamen. Is she going to sleep with things that are hideous and dirty and maggot filled? With Freyr, it's hard to tell. She was accused of sleeping with her own brother by Loki. But the point I'm trying to make here is all of these races are pretty much exactly like the others. And the other is the word we need to remember here. Because when Snorri was writing this, you had Aesir, you had Vanir, you had all the different races, 5 of them actually, and one was the other. And you always have to have an other. You have us, you have them. So Thor had the other, which were Jotuns. He hated Jotuns. His whole job was to kill Jotuns. But if you go back and you look at the genetics of Thor, this is the 4th disconnect. Buri has sex and a child with a Jotun. Okay? That child is Bor, who is 50% Jotun. Bor has a child with Besler, and those children are Odin, Vili, and V. Odin is 25% Aesir and 75% Jotun. Odin then has non-conjugal or conjugal relations with a giantess and has Thor. So genetically, if you follow the Mendel square down 3 or 4 generations, Thor is 87.5% giant and 12.5% Asgardian. Not a good way to deal with your family, going out and trying to kill every Jotun you can. 4th disconnect. All right, we're at the 30-minute mark. I'm going to talk about all the ending, and then we're going to just talk about some other fun stuff. At the end, and I'm not saying we haven't already had it. I'm not saying it's not coming. I'm not even sure if there isn't more than 1 or 2 Ragnaroks. It could be a repetitive cycle. But in the end, Loki, who is chained to a stone for killing Balder, with a great serpent above his head, dripping venom, being protected by his wife Siggy and a bowl, will break his bonds. Fenrir will break his bonds, and Jormungandr will lose his tail. The entire 9 realms will shake, and Ragnarok will begin. Heimdall will blow the Gjallarhorn, and all of the fallen warriors in both Valhalla and Folkvane will go out the massive doors and go out to the plains in front of Asgard to kill and be killed the forces of Loki and the dead. Loki will lead the dead from Helheim. They will ride on a boat made from all the nails of all the fingers and toes of all the dead. They will loose the anchors and attack. And at that point, as is told by the three Norns, some will live and some will die. Excuse me. I'd like to say I'm drinking mead, but actually I'm just drinking sweet tea. I know it's just not as exciting. Thor will immediately seek out Jormungandr. He will kill Jormungandr, take 9 steps, and die from the venom of Jormungandr. Heimdall and Loki will kill each other. Fenrir will kill Odin, but Odin's son, Vali, wearing a shoe of all the leather scraps from all the leather workers in all the worlds, will hold the great mouth of Fenrir open and kill the wolf. Surtur will eventually then, here we go, here's my guy, my big guy Surtur. From Muspelheim, Surtur will come with his great fiery sword and burn everything to the ground. Asgard, Midgard, all of it. And 2 individuals, Leifr and Leifrisen, will hide inside Yggdrasil. And after the flame washes everything, they will come out and start humanity again. Baldur will leave Helheim and become one of the new gods. One of Thor's children will take up the hammer, Mjolnir, and become a guardian of Asgard. And Asgard will rise with Midgard being protected. And it all starts again. Now, what is the commonality of all of this? Where is she? Right there. No one says anything about hell. Hell never leaves Helheim. There is nothing about hell in Ragnarok. Someone has to deal with the dead. Helheim is still there. The dead still go to hell. Nihog, the great dragon, still eats the corpses of the evil ones, and the worlds go on. This is the story of the beginning and the end. But it's not the end of literature. It's certainly not the end of everything that we have that we know about in Icelandic and Scandinavian literature. So now I'm going to jump a little. I'm going to talk about the 275 sagas, eddas, mals, lays, and thedas. We all know what a saga is. It's a story, a great story. We all know what an edda is. It's a word that doesn't exist. Poetic edda. No one has ever figured out what the word edda means. We don't even know if Snorri knows what the word edda means. He put it down 1,000 years ago and it's stuck. And it's like, okay, we'll go with this. A mal is a short story without poetry. A theta is a thread, not quite a story, but not quite a poem. It's sort of like a novella or just a short blip in there. And a lay is a French term used for non-poetic stories. There are over 270 of those right now that we know of. More than likely, there was probably 1,000 more. Marla and I have been lucky enough to actually see them, touch them. The Flatia book has 275 single page vellum sheets at the Arni Magnusson in Iceland. The sagas are there, some of the pieces, some of the other literature. The Heimkringla is there, more stories. You've got the Voluspa, you've got the Havamal, which are the sayings of Odin. All these add to the literature of the Scandinavians and specifically the Icelanders, because it was the Icelanders that were first at writing. They're the ones that wrote most of it. And then after they started, all the kings, Harold, Halkin, all of them, they wanted their stories told. So even though there is this much of sagas and pagan and heathen things, there is this much literature that's outside of it. You've got the stories of all the Christian kings. You've got the stories of all of the forced conversion of Iceland, of all the cryptids of Iceland, of all the foods that are in Scandinavia, of all the travels of Greenland, of Markland and Helluland and Vinland. By the way, those are the three places that are here in North America. Helluland was the first place, and it was so unacceptable that Leifer and his crew just passed by. Markland was the second place, and while it wasn't too bad, it wasn't great, and eventually they ended up in Vinland. Whether you believe Vinland is down somewhere in Maine or Massachusetts because they found butternut buttons up in Lansing Meadows is really conjecture at this point. We do know that there was a settlement in Lansing Meadows that came and went. It was maybe 100 years. We do know that some Icelanders Greenlanders were actually born, specifically one, were actually born on the mainland of North America. And we kind of know what happened to the Greenlanders in the 1400s. There was a mini ice age, and the Greenlanders were not smart enough to understand that they needed to eat like the Inuits and the native that lived there, and they stuck to agrarian and cattle. The snows came, the cattle died. They did a dig a few years ago, and they even found tooth marks on the dog bones. So that's what happened to Greenlanders. But I digress. Anyway, so that's one of the things that is important to remember. It's not just heathen history. It's Christian history. It's the history of all the Scandinavians that went to the Middle East, that grabbed a polar bear in Greenland, went to Sweden, dropped it off, went to the Middle East, came back, got it back, gave it to another king in Norway, was rewarded for his efforts, and went back to Iceland to live happily ever after. These are the fun stories that you can find if you just look for them hard enough. I'm not going to bore you with anything else because I'm sure that somebody has a question somewhere out there. So I am going to I'm not going to allow, mainly because it's not my gig. I'm just talking away. I'm going to have y'all ask questions. So there you go. Go for it. And if not, I'll just go start drinking. Wow.
So I'm sorry, it's a little noisy in here. Out of all of the studying you've done, I'm sure that you've come across misconceptions about the Norse gods. And what is the one that pisses you off the most?
I think the one that pisses me off the most is hell. I think she gets a bad rap. Um, I'm a member of the Society for Creative Anachronism, which the two of you that are not in the SCA know. And I have always had an affinity for the goddess Hel, even though I pray to Freyr. Mundanely, I'm heathen. But I think the perception of death and the way they tried to make her into actual hell, because I'm not certain who came first, hell with two L's, the Christian, or hell with one L, the personification of death. Um, it bothers me that she has this stigma that she's evil, that she's ugly, that she's all of that. I think that's what really bothers me more. But Tyr really pisses me off. That's the other one that really gets me. We swear to Tyr to tell the truth, and he outright lied. So, wow. Okay then. Um,
Okay, I have a question. So
yes.
you just talked about tier and swearing to tier, and if I recall your presentation correctly, there were several gods in several stories that did things opposite of how we reference them and think of them. Do you think some of that might be um, intentionally poking fun at human foibles itself?
Well, I think it's intentional, but not necessarily for human foibles. I think it's intentional from Snorri and some of the other Christian writers who were couching all of these stories in human philosophy. We always talk about the Asir as gods. Odin is a god. Thor is a god. They're not gods. It's about the only thing the MCU got in 37 movies is that they're not gods. They're just not human. Um, we will never know if any of that is true. But then again, we take it on faith. That's what religion is. It's just faith. I think that in order to tell a good story, you had to have um, great giants, and you had to have ugly people, and you had to have Fafnir and Seeger and all of this fighting and everything, because that's the way a story is made. Because if nobody likes the story, you're not going to get paid to do it, and that's the big thing. You want people to actually pay you to be a bard. A lot of these sagas, a lot of these stories are about bards. I mean, one told a story that the Queen of Norway didn't like, and he was thrown into a dungeon and he was getting ready to be killed. And his buddy came in the night before and said, "Look, you need to write a better story, and you need to somehow make her happy so she doesn't kill you tomorrow." And he did, and she was happy, and she gave him gold, and she didn't kill him. But you can't have Hallmark bards all the time. Sometimes you got to have Stephen King bards. Sometimes you got to have H.P. Lovecraft bards. Sometimes you got to have Cthulhu coming out of the North Sea or something, because good stories sell.
We have a question from Janice White.
Yes.
Go ahead, Janice.
Hi. Um,
Hi.
when you were talking about the dark fairies, you were saying they weren't, black or brown or
Uh-huh.
could you give a little clarity to that? Because I know the beginning of the Thor movies, um, Iris Elba was Hemdall. So is there, you're shaking your head,
I'm
but
shaking my head because we were talking about this earlier. I hope Stan Lee finally runs into some of these and realizes what he did to Norse cosmology. Very little of the MCU is accurate.
Okay.
We don't know what, if any, colors any of these Norse deities were. They could have been blue. They don't take into account color.
Okay.
We know there were, I want to say African American, but they're not African American. They were actually African. We know there were dark-skinned Vikings. We know there were Middle Eastern Vikings, but most of the Norse were white. And most of the Norse didn't have red hair until they tried to civilize Scotland and went shopping for wives. That's a joke, by the way. Please don't take that seriously. But no, the reason that they're called light elves versus dark elves is because of where they lived. Svartalheim it was a dark place. It's described as lots of caves, lots of darkness, lots of smoke, where Alfheim was described as lots of light. Freyr is basically in charge of Alfheim, even though he's a Vanir and he lives in Asgard. So it's just a difference in it's like living in it's like living in a volcano versus living on the beach. It's geographical. It isn't necessarily physiological.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I want to talk about somebody. See her right there? See what she has on? She does not have horns. Okay? This is a no-no. They never had horns. This came from Wagner and the Ring of the Nibelungering, because they thought that Vikings had horns. However, this is the goddess, this is the angel of death. And she is described by Ibn Fadlan. And if you watch the first part of the 13th Warrior, she basically is a good representation. They had wings. She carried a spear. She also carried a very sharp knife, because what would happen at a funeral, and we know this because we have a first-hand account of this, is a slave girl would volunteer to accompany her master to the afterlife. She would get so drunk that she didn't realize she was having sex with almost everybody at the funeral. She was then led to the ship, and before it dawned on her the cosmic mistake she might have made, the angel of death cut her throat, then held her down until she bled out, and then torched the ship on land and watched it burn. The reason I believe that they don't do ship burials at sea is, and this is something that's cute if you ever want to get 5 and 6 year olds completely mesmerized and you have a gas stove, boil water in a paper cup. You can actually boil water over a gas stove in a paper cup. As the water evaporates, the cup burns to the level of the water. Think about a boat. You push a boat out into the bay or the fjord. You put coal oil all over it. You light it on fire. What happens? It gets to the water line. It stops burning. And now you've got a halfway trip to Valhalla. Not going to happen. And they almost never burned the boats. They usually buried them. And we have Viking burials all over Scandinavia. We've got the Oseberg. We've got all the others. And if it wasn't for the fact that they buried the boats, we wouldn't find these. So the whole death by water and everything, no, didn't happen. Somebody piped in and then piped back out. Okay. Anything else?
Do we have any other questions?
Really? Edric is just sitting there going, wow. I'm making fun of you, Edric. I love you.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now, but people are welcome to chat longer.
Love you too, Gypsy.